Welcome to the Veterinary Project Podcast, episode 114.
Welcome to the show created by vets featuring absolutely no pets. This is the Veterinary Project Podcast, hosted by Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Leicht. Our resident veterinarians have swapped out their stethoscopes in favor of microphones to bring you the Veterinary Project Podcast, a show focused on real conversations, aimed to connect this amazing profession full of remarkable people. Through the sharing of collective stories and wisdom, and connecting over the many unique challenges we face, we invite you to join our community of veterinary professionals leading intentional lives. And now, here are the hosts of the Veterinary Project Podcast, Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Leicht.
Welcome back to the Veterinary Project Podcast. You are joined, as always, Dr. Michael Bugg, Dr. Jonathan Leicht. Mikey, how are you doing this afternoon?
Doing well, Jonathan. Still in the new baby sleepless haze, but I won't dwell on that because it's pretty awesome to have the little guy. By the time this episode drops, it should be Halloween week. So Halloween will have been on Monday. This episode drops on the following Wednesday. Halloween is my sort of favorite unofficial holiday. We've had our family of tigers picked out for months. So I'm really looking forward to getting out on the prowl, trick-or-treating.
You are going to have some fun. And has little Ethan got his own costume as well, too?
Oh, yeah. We ordered like a baby tiger outfit months ago. I mean, it's probably way too big, but it was the smallest we could find. So
we, on the other hand, are probably going costume shopping again this weekend because the kids have all of a sudden decided that they want to change what their costumes are going to be. And we are likely not to get them into their current costumes. Yeah. So fun times in the Lighthouse.
You can't deal with the last minute kid changes. I totally get that, but it's got to be like the biggest life hack in the world to shop off season. Like we went to the Halloween store in sometime in like September, not a single person in there. Like it's just like
you probably have full stock of everything you wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. Like just for everything, like buying your Christmas lights. Don't go in early December, like everything in life. If you do it off season, it just seems so much easier for shopping anyway.
Candace wonders why I go to Home Depot as much as I do. And it's for that exact reason right there. I love going into the aisles and seeing what is on the opposite end of the calendar because it's so fun to see what's available and or at a discounted price for brand new stuff that, like you said, in season costs double the amount. And most of the time right now isn't available anyway. Yep.
Yeah.
So let's get
we are off topic. Hey.
I think that's going to be one of these.
Bring us back.
That's going to be one of these shows today because this is going to be a great one. And yet we've got a lot to get into, which we don't fully know how we're going to wrap together. So today is about how to deal with change. If there's one consistent in our life for you and me and everybody else that's listening to this, it is change. And for the two of us today, we want to take this from the approach of both personal and business change as it relates to our current circumstances, and as well as what we see in our ideal space, but also looking at it, what the present really holds true. So I'm interested to see where this conversation goes. I think, if we look at it from a start, Mike, in our pre-recording, when you're discussing in terms of what change looks like, let's start with that. From your definition or from your view on what change is, where does this come into play in you and your current world?
Oh, good question here. Well, I mean, I guess the reason for the episode when we were like brainstorming what's all going on is like, I know in your business, you are undergoing change. Most people may not know, but pivoting from, is it COO to CEO?
That's correct.
In my business, in the real estate business, I'm looking ahead to 2023 and looking at kind of launching, larger sort of funds. Even here on the podcast, as you mentioned, we're looking at changing our back end social media. So hopefully that change like kind of goes unnoticed to the viewers because like it's all behind the scenes. But for us, we still have to go through that. So when I look at change, I kind of, the framework I look at is like, I feel like it's often driven either by desperation or inspiration. So I know that's not a definition of change as you asked for, but every time in my life when I'm faced again with these sort of pivots, I can usually look back on it and be like, did I make that change because of desperation, or did I choose to make that change because I was inspired? If that makes sense.
So desperation and inspiration. And then you use the example of the behind the scenes, which our listeners won't view, but we're making some changes in our back end, both from a process standpoint and, to continue to evolve as the veterinary project has evolved in itself. Do you, in that exact example, do you see that of desperation or inspiration? And do you provide those strict definitions, or is it a variance along the pendulum as to which side that falls?
You're meaning the changes we're making here on the podcast?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So this is kind of another point of how I look at change is you really have to measure yourself. And like I always say, review the game tape, because I like sports. So kind of a sports analogy. And unfortunately, like it can be really easy. I'll use a quick money example. If you're not doing well financially or you have a bunch of debt, and every time you open your statements, it just doesn't feel good. It's pretty easy to just stop opening your statements and ignore that. And this, sort of stick your head in the sand and not deal with the issue, because that feels better than facing it. But really all you're doing is you're backing yourself further and further in a corner. So with the podcast, you and I talk about like, what are our goals? What are our metrics that we're trying to hit? And then we're also, bootstrapping this. So we are trying to hit all those metrics on a budget. And so this was just a result of, reviewing the game tape and being like, okay, we've gotten offside. We're not hitting our metrics and we're over budget.
Yep.
We need to make changes.
That's
right?
it. Right there. And that course of change management, if we're talking about the initial discussion, the back and forth, the head in the sand for a while, all of the above, that change can sometimes take a day, an hour, or months. So in the exact example of the behind the scenes, this has been a discussion that we've had for the last probably 8 to 10 months, if we really look back at it. And that, I think, correlates really well to personal and life changes. Yeah.
And I mean, it's an interesting one. In this situation, I mean, relatively minor, right? Like we're tweaking some stuff. Like this is not a major life decision. But along that vein, one of the things I've also noticed, now I'm going everywhere here. One of the things I've noticed when we talk about dealing with change is the people that I look up to the most, and sort of quote unquote, that are the most successful. A common thing I see with them is from the moment that they make a decision to change, that between that and the time that they implement it is quick. Like there is no downtime. From the moment they've measured something and realized we're not getting the result, or just their intuition, they know it's time to change, they put that into action immediately. Right. So I know for me, like I'm okay at that, but in some areas not. Like case in point here, like we probably should have made this change quite a while ago. And there was too long between decision and implementation.
Yep. So when you're looking at that in your daily life, Mike, on the personal front, when you're looking at change, are there any tactics that you take on, or is there any skill sets that you've learned over the years to try and help, knowing your own personality, try and make sure that gap is closed as much as possible?
I feel like I'm going to be repeating myself. It's mostly like the whole process we've talked about vision planning. What I'm really trying to do, because I've done this poorly in the past, is I am trying to make decisions from inspiration. So I would consider that to be like more intentional. So mapping a vision for my life, my business, our family. What am I hoping that can look like? Then review the game tape and be like, is that going to get me there? Okay, yes or no. If it's not, what change do I need to implement to get me there? Versus, being on the other side of the coin, desperation, which, full disclosure, I've definitely made decisions from there, and I can even think of times changing veterinary clinics. I would say some of those decisions were more from desperation, right? Like, I don't want to be here. Like, I want out of this situation. Yeah. So it was more like leaving point A as opposed to trying to get to point B.
Point B. Excellent.
Yeah.
And do you think that's something that's evolved for you over time? And do you think that has been, if I'm being more direct, is that a skill that you had to learn, or was it ingrained in you? Meaning looking backwards to move forward?
It was definitely a skill I had to learn, and I super broad stroke here, but I would say, humans were kind of creatures of comfort. Yep. Like change, it's not wrong for change to feel strange or to be scary, right? Like, I think that's pretty normal for people to have elements of fear around change. And so like most of our wiring is like, no, let's just stay comfortable as opposed to push into that new unknown.
And I'll take that a step further in that acronym that's sometimes used around fear in terms of false evidence appearing real. We as humans are great at making up stories as to why that change will actually be a negative. So therefore we'll stay in our comfort zone for longer, which will actually lead to more negative actual results than what you're after, no matter in what area of your life. So yeah, I think you've nailed it on the head.
Yeah. Yeah. And that just goes back that speed of implementation, right? Like the longer we let that fear cripple us. What's funny is that like not making a decision is also a decision, right? Like that's a choice. It's a choice not to change. Yeah. And the longer that you can sometimes stay in those negative situations, the bigger that gap grows.
There's lots of people that I think of when I think this, but I think to Mark Wahlberg, actually, he's like, do you want the pain now or do you want the pain later, in terms of getting to the gym, doing it consistently, being on no matter where he is in the world? And from that change perspective, he wants to ensure he's got a healthy body, healthy mind for his family, his career, all the rest of it. And it does go into that is, hey, I can make it up and put my head in the sand, but before you know it, 10 years will pass, you're $30 in the 30 pounds heavier and doesn't look good. And then your change is even harder.
Absolutely. Yeah. And health is like a good example. Cause I mean, we all know people, unfortunately that have had whatever, a health scare of some sort, and that'll often be an impetus to like, okay, it's time for change. Yep. Right. And so to your point, Mark Wahlberg trying to be more out in front of it, proactive.
That's it. Yep. As we all could be. No, that's excellent. So then when you look at change management as an overall, Mike, how does this affect your overall day-to-day? Are you active and think, oh, I'm going through change now, I better do X, Y, and Z? Or does it just fit into the bigger context of your life setup and plan? Because you're very conscious about this.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fortunate in that for a change to happen in our household, it's a conversation between Rosalie and I, and then we can implement it, right? Like I'm more curious what your answer is on this question, because you lead teams of people.
Yep. Right.
A lot of what I do, there's not teams per se, right? Like, yes, I'm choosing what subcontractors I'm working with, or, the management company of an apartment building, but they have their process internally. Right. So I'm agile, and I like that. Like Rosalie and I really are fairly agile in how fast we could change. Like, we could move tomorrow, really.
Yep.
So I guess I'm going to cop out, and I'm going to throw that question back to you, because we chat a lot, like off air, and now the different roles that you're in, and now with the new CEO hat on, you're managing and leading multiple veterinary clinics, in different, large animal, small animal. So I'm curious about how you roll out change.
Well, for one, nice cop out. I appreciate it. And I will get you back somehow. I don't know how yet, but it'll come up. We've got 10 minutes or so. In terms of change management, we were talking about this in the pre-recording. I'm right in the middle of it. So going from that COO role, which is leading the operations and day-to-day business, into a CEO role where you're really looking at what is the vision, what is the future, what is the foundations of a business that is needed, while also delegating and sharing in that vision in a way that can actually get people on board. I'm right in the middle of that right now. Literally, we are 3 weeks in terms of lots of in-person meetings, discussions, following up on vision planning that we had already had from the start of the year, if we're speaking Mosaic Veterinary Partners in particular. But then you're also looking at, okay, what is my current state? So I'm taking this. This is not Jonathan made. This is somebody else that is a lot more smart and educated in the change management realm. But you need to look at your current state. Where are we as a business? Where are we as a team? What are we doing and accomplishing in 2022? And I also look backwards a little bit. So taking notes, diving down into conversations with individuals maybe that I've not in the past in order to understand what current state is. Then my job is to go through, hey, what do I need to do to embrace both setups for helping my employees as we move forward and embracing a vision that may be a little bit different than what they are used to from a different person's perspective, and looking at how do I help them adopt, change, be engaged, and understand the why behind it, so we can go from current state to transition state to future state. And for me, that's really important. And that's only on the people side. And there's so much more to it, but I'm just trying to keep it on a basic level. The second thing on that end is we're also going through a technical change state right now. So what are the current structures within our organization, whether it's the organizational structure, who reports to who's responsible for what are the priorities of our individual team members? All those pieces right now, we're in a little bit of a flux, and everybody's looking sometimes to the CEO to say, hey, you've got to come up with this final decision. And therefore, again, there's a lot of discussion that has to go into that to recognize both that, in my view, the CEO, yes, is the decision maker, true, but only to a point. The point is, what is the change that is present within your organization that allows it to move forward? And if everybody's not on board with that and understanding what that future vision looks like, no matter what decision the CEO makes, he or she is not going to be successful, because everybody won't be able to follow it and take the lead and then engage in their own way. So we're going through that right now on the technical side as well too, is are we allowing for change that meets requirements and needs in the business right now, as well as for what our future looks like? So we are right dab in the middle of it. And it's sometimes, it can feel really rewarding as you see individuals step up, step in a different fashion than maybe what you even thought would happen. It's rewarding to see something that you've been a part of, that you've got emotions to, that your life and business and partner in the business, you want this to succeed, not only for the financial end, but even more for the challenges that it brings for people that want to grow in their business. And I've gone totally on a rant here, but this is the fun part and this is the hard part. And shit, we could have this conversation in 6 months from now, and I'll have a whole different spectrum on what the change looks like, because we're right in the middle of it. Yeah,
man, I got lots of questions in the comments. So I guess to keep this kind of tight, but how do you keep the engagement?
So went off the deep end.
How do you keep the engagement? Because I feel like, the larger an organization, this is obvious, but the larger an organization gets, the more, people around the table and the more people in the organization. So the more personalities and, feeling whatever they're feeling, how do you get that engagement, right? So that you can, course correct, or if you're, massively changing direction, so everyone's on board.
My view is, are your team members able to make choices and decisions that both impact themselves and impact the business in a positive way? Have you given them the leeway to actually make choices that are beneficial for them and their team? And if you haven't, you need to get the heck out of the way and allow them to do it, or train them, or help advocate for them, or sometimes bring the line in when you see them struggling, so that they do have that opportunity to make change. An individual is, in my view, only as engaged as you've provided the training, the setup, and the also both empathy and encouragement to do. And people want to do well. And if you give them that opportunity, why wouldn't they? We're in an amazing industry. What do we want to do? Is an amazing place. I love where we work within the veterinary industry. So give them the opportunity and the tools to do so. And again, 90% of the time, they'll do fantastic. The other 10% of the time, sometimes my old boss would say, is they're in the wrong seat on the bus. Fantastic. Figure out the seat. And then sometimes they're just not on the right bus or on the right team. Go find a different team. That's all right too. Don't feel bad about it. Just time to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing, I don't know why this is popping in my head too, but a lot of times people get, very scared that change is permanent and irreversible. Right. And it's like, there's so many times where it's like, well, we're going to try this out. Yeah. It may or may not work. Like, we don't actually know. We think it will, and we'll see, and then review the game tape, take some measurements, and be like, hey, was that a good change, or do we need to actually go back? Was the old way better? Right. And I know that's frustrating.
But again, it's in the roles that you and I are as entrepreneurs and business people and family members and husbands and wives and everybody that's listening to this. There's a portion of analytics that comes into it, data capture, time, history, what's the future going to look like, as well as that thing called intuition. And when your gut's telling you something and you've got a little bit of backup to it, guess what? In our roles, you got to make change, because if you're feeling that, there's probably 3 people down the line that are also feeling it, that if you don't do it, confidence goes down, engagement goes down. You basically haven't done your job.
Yeah. Yeah, it is wild. When you had asked me a lot earlier here in the recording, how things have changed, and that intuition piece, it's hard for me to quantify that, but that probably just comes with, age and putting in more reps. But it really does get to be like that, trusting the gut. Once you're an expert in an area and you have that 10,000 hours, there's a lot of stuff that will just intuitively, the direction you should be heading.
That's correct. Yep. I'm helping a colleague, as they're getting started in their own veterinary practice. And there's some questions that came my way here recently. And I was looking at it and going, holy heck, like, there's a lot to take in, but that's only time and experience. No different than any veterinary professional that, has that time and experience in clinic. You eventually start to feel it, see it, it, and that allows you to take those next steps in your career, et cetera. And that's all change over time. So I don't know. That's, we talked about another piece in the pre-recording a little bit in terms of closing that gap of making a decision and making change. I also will jump back to this and go, one of my shortcomings is sometimes I will make decisions quickly or pivot when needed without having the backup or providing enough why to my team members so that they can fully function at 100% knowing where to go forward. And that's as a measure of my role, but also as a measure of a shortcoming of myself. I think that's important in change management, is ensuring that everybody's aligned as best as possible to why the change is occurring. Because if they don't know it, what's the fail safe? Going back to current state or even past state, because that's the comfort area. And you spoke to that earlier. I think that's a really important piece that's sometimes forgotten or is maybe missed in that process of change.
Yeah. See, and this is where this is so such an art form, because on one hand, what it seems like is, okay, if change is needed, implement it quickly, don't delay, but you should have some steps in place, but you also don't need to know all the steps, because you'll never know all the steps. So it's like such an art form there of like, make the decision, implement it quickly, but not too quickly. Make sure you communicate with your team.
This is why we have another 10 to 20 books to read, Mike, more CE to do, and a lot more years of wisdom with more gray hairs to pop up, because I'd love to turn it into an art. I'm not at that stage yet. I'll only speak for myself, but damn, will that feel good one day.
Yeah, it's an evolution. Rosalie took a picture of me. I fell asleep on the couch holding Ethan. And I was like, holy shit, I'm getting a lot of gray hairs. Like, it was just from like the angle. And I was like, oh man. So the gray hairs. I never
feel bad about gray hairs. Gray hairs equal wisdom. You got to live some life on earth in order to get gray hairs. And from my perspective, that's all right.
Yeah. So maybe that's a sign of wisdom and better change management to come.
There we go. Well, we're going to have to come up with a crafty title on this one. And hopefully it's been beneficial to individuals, because change management, it's present in all of our lives. How do we deal with it? You've got 2 people's perspective right here. Hopefully there's been something tactful there, or even more, I think, for Mike and I, and we were talking about this in the pre-recording, is acknowledging that we don't all have it together. We're all figuring it out over time. And there's resources, there's individuals smarter than us with more experience to help guide you in whatever fashion that is when it goes to change management, whether it is inspiratory, inspirational, desperation, etc. So yes, thanks for joining us. Hopefully this was helpful for you. Till the next time.
Thank you for listening to the Veterinary Project Podcast. As a recap on behalf of our hosts, the Veterinary Project Podcast will be releasing new episodes weekly, so be sure to tune in as we bring you more conversations aimed at helping you enjoy a life well lived. If you enjoyed what you heard on the show and you want to stay in the know, please like, love, and or subscribe to the podcast on the listening platform of your choosing, as we're available on all the usual suspects. If you know of others that may benefit from these conversations, we'd love it if you please share the show with them, as this will help us grow our community to reach more and more veterinary professionals. Speaking of which, if you are a veterinary professional and would like to get connected with more like-minded individuals who are joining us on this journey, please send an email to theveterinaryprojectpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll invite you to be a part of our private Facebook group. General feedback, requests for information, or perhaps requests to be a guest on the show can also be sent to the Veterinary Project Podcast @gmail.com. Dr. Michael Bugg and Dr. Jonathan Leicht, thank you for listening to the show, and we'll catch you again next week for another episode of the Veterinary Project Podcast. Bye for now.